A group of pro-Trump attorneys and supporters is circulating a draft of a presidential executive order that uses alleged Chinese interference in the 2020 election. That's the first time I've heard of Chinese interference in the 2020 election. I'm sure that they maybe did. It wouldn't blow my mind, but like it's always about like, you know, it's always about like Russian interference or about how the Dems stole it or Biden stole it or something like that. First time I've ever heard them mention Chinese interference in the 2020 election. Of which there is no evidence, yeah, it doesn't shock me, to justify a national emergency declaration that they claim would give President Donald Trump sweeping power over voting, multiple sources told ABC News. This just screams of when Hitler was appointed chancellor of the Weimar Republic. And then he just banned the Communist Party. He banned all other political parties, and then he made like the way that the voting works in the Reichstag, which was their parliament, be like overseen by like their paramilitary wing of the Nazi Party, the NSDAP. This just very similar. It feels very similar to that. The 17-page draft order, which sources say Trump has reviewed, would mandate the use of voter ID and hand-counted ballots and ban mail-in ballots ahead of upcoming midterm elections. Yeah, his thing against, I'm sure you already know this, but his thing against mail-in ballots is because they tend to skew a bit more left, a bit more Democrat. And so, like, if he just takes away all mail-in ballot, like the ability to do that, then he knows, like, of course it's going to affect, some Republicans and some Democrats, but it's going to more strongly affect the Democrats and therefore help Republican political chances of winning the presidential election, winning the midterms, whatever it may be. And also, like, hand-counted ballots is, like, not necessarily a good idea, right? Like, on the surface, you might be like, yeah, like, we don't use these voting machines who have these algorithms we can't see or we don't know as much about, or we might not have the ability, maybe you can see the algorithms, but like, they're complex and you're not a computer coder. And so you don't have the ability to like decipher them or whatever. But like hand counted ballots have just as much, if not more potential for corruption than using like a voting machine or whatever, right? Like all it would take is whoever's counting those ballots to not be good faith, to, hide a ballot here or two or miscount on accident, or on purpose or whatever it may be. It seems like, when you have a scale of 300 million people, right, only, maybe 50% of them are voting or something, right? That's, 150 million votes or whatever. I would think that there's just as much, if not more, potential for corruption, for impropriety, for some shenanigans to go on with hand counted ballots on that scale than there is with using voting machines like we currently do. Putting aside the whole problem of like counting 150 million ballots, in like 1 or 2 days, which is usually we like you have those election results like the same day, right? Like the election happens like November 8th, and then by like the evening, by like midnight or so, the morning of the next day, you have a pretty good idea of like how, the results and whatever, right? I imagine it would have to be delayed much more than that. Or you'd have to hire so many people to come in and hand count these ballots. The attorneys pushing the draft order said they anticipate it would be incorporated into a planned executive order, which they expect to be issued soon. I just don't understand how that, like, an executive order would have the ability to do this, because an executive order is like just like a directive to the executive agencies, right? I'm pretty sure that states have constitutionally the right to like run their own elections, like for the most part. Obviously, there are some Supreme Court rulings, such as like you're not allowed to have a literacy test or things like that on your to get a voter ID to be able to go and vote or whatever. You can't have like an IQ test or things like that. But like for the most part, other than that, the way that like, counties decide where voting locations are going to be or how many there are per citizenry, or, all those kinds of things are like in the states, like those are up to the state. Like, I don't understand how an executive order would possibly like apply to this. In this case, I would imagine an executive order would be just more of a suggestion, unless like the executive order was hinged on like taking away something, like maybe we're going to stop giving you Medicaid or Medicare money, or we're going to stop giving you any federal support or whatever. Any of the money that you get from federal programs to your state, unless you like adopt these rules or whatever. That's the only way I can imagine them doing this. It is not clear if Trump is considering or will ultimately issue the order. I'm sure he's considering it, right? If it's literally an executive order that's been leaked and circulating, how can you say he's not considering it, right? Obviously, you can't say he will ultimately issue it until it's issued or until they make a more definitive statement on it. But how can you say it is not clear if Trump is considering? Of course, they're considering it. What do you mean? This is their MO. This is right up their lane. At this point, it's got to be ASAP because we got primaries, said Florida attorney Peter Tickton, who told ABC News on Thursday that he has been in contact with the White House about the draft order. Tickton, who also represents former Colorado County Clerk Tina Peters, who was imprisoned for breaking into voting equipment. I think I maybe did a story on her, actually. Said the emergency declaration would empower Trump to ban electronic voting machines and mail-in ballots because they could be tools used for foreign interference. The most important provision, if you ask me, is the hand counting, Tickton said. Get rid of the machines. That's what we need to do right away. Yeah, I'm just imagining in these like rural counties where like it may be close, split-wise, that you have like, it's usually old people that come and work volunteer to work the voting facilities, right? Because they're the ones that are retired. They're the ones that have the time and like desire to come in and like volunteer their time to be, one of the people that helps sign you in when you go to a voting facility on election day. They're much more likely to be like Republican leaning, to be conservative leaning. And so I would think they're much more likely to also be like corrupt and like be a bit more willing to, potentially miscount or do whatever it may, engage in shenaniganry, engage in shenanigans. Despite Trump's claims, there is no evidence of widespread voter fraud or foreign interference in the 2020 election. An assessment by the U.S. intelligence community found no evidence that any foreign actor altered vote tallies or changed election results in 2020. Yeah, this is one of like the most easily debunkable like election fraud claims like that uninformed conservatives tend to make about this. Like there's been so many court cases, I'm sure a number of which allege this and talk about this, and none of them have come to fruition. When asked about Article 1 of the Constitution assigning power to regulate elections to state legislatures and Congress, Tickton acknowledged state legislatures' authority, but said the claims of foreign election interference justify action. The Constitution basically gives the power to the state legislatures, not the governors, not any judges, not anything in the federal government, but just the state legislatures, the power to determine how that state is going to conduct its elections. So the president doesn't have any power to change that. But we really do have an election emergency right now. See, his wording of the word emergency here also reminds me of Hitler's power grabs in the early 30s. Because whenever he was appointed chancellor, this is why President Hindenburg, I guess it's a small history lesson, during the Weimar Republic, before the Third Reich was formed in Nazi Germany and everything, President Hindenburg didn't want to appoint Hitler as chancellor because he was worried that he would use what was called Article 48 of the Weimar Constitution, which allowed the chancellor and the president to claim emergency powers. And they didn't define what an emergency was, right? It just was left open. So like if they determined there was an emergency, they could claim economic powers. They could disregard parts of the Weimar Constitution. And he was worried that that's exactly what Hitler would do. As soon as he was given the chancellery, that the first opportunity that he would declare an emergency and he would start stripping, he would start consolidating power. He would, and he did that. One of his first steps was banning the Communist Party and then banning all other political parties so that the NSDAP, which was the political wing of the Nazi Party, could have full control of the government. And they use these emergency Article 48 powers given and during the Weimar Republic Constitution. And so like him saying that we have an election emergency right now, just like, and them trying to use these emergency pretexts to do all this is just very reminiscent. Sources said President Trump has reviewed versions of the draft order and has had discussions with those involved with the effort. Yeah, of course he has. How can you make this claim and then up here say at this, how can you make that claim and then say up here, it is not clear if Trump is considering or will ultimately issue the order? Like but then literally like 3 paragraphs later, you're saying sources said President Trump has reviewed versions of the draft order and has had discussions with those involved in the effort. That's literally what that is. So I don't know. This article's contradicting itself already. Tickton told ABC News that during the drafting of the order, he has been in contact with a number of MAGA figures, including Michael Flynn, MyPillow Guy CEO Mike Lindell, of course. Oh my God, that's hilarious. And Patrick Byrne, all who played roles in the aftermath of the 2020 election and worked to attempt to overturn the results. A social media post made by Trump on February 13th appeared to tease an upcoming executive order on the issue. The Democrats refuse to vote for voter ID or citizenship. The reason is very simple. They want to continue to cheat in elections. This was not what our founders desired. The post said, I have searched the depths of legal arguments not yet articulated or voted on this subject, and will be presenting an irrefutable one in the very near future. There will be voter ID for the midterm elections, whether approved by Congress or not. Yeah, this just screams of like manipulating the system under the pretext of emergency to like as a rank power grab, right? And basically every state, as far as I'm aware of, right, you need to be a registered voter, and most of them you do need to present some kind of ID, right? Like to prove that you are an actual U.S. citizen and that you have the right to be voting in these elections. I don't think you can just, and is any state, as far as I'm aware of, you can just walk into the polling place and just like without any, like nobody's going to stop you. Nobody's going to like ask you any questions. Nobody's going to make you show ID or do anything like that. They're just going to let you walk up and vote. And you like, I don't think that happens anywhere. Right. So the use of the voter ID seems like they're literally just creating a hurdle so that less people go out and vote, right? They know that like the retirement community type people who have the time and the resources and the desire to go out and get voter IDs are going to be more likely. Like the number of those people that are going to do it is going to outweigh the number of people that are going to be harmed by this, who may be like overburdened, people who are working full time or more than full time, who just, they don't want to go to some office and stand in line and may potentially pay money or do whatever it may take, resource-wise to get a hold of the voter ID, or they might not do it in time. Maybe they don't even hear about this happening until, a couple weeks before the election. And oh, shucks, turns out you needed to apply for the voter ID 3 months before the election. Darn. Like, this is clearly just like a way to subvert the will of the people and cynically gain more political power, more electoral influence. And also, as he's saying, whether approved by Congress or not makes me think they're going to have to take, like, there's no way Congress is going to approve this kind of thing. I have a really hard time believing that. And so, like, they're going to have to do it through, like, a threat. They're going to have to say, look, we're not going to give you your funding. We're not going to give you federal funding for your programs unless you adopt these policies, right? Which is just super messed up on its own. It's just, the founding fathers would be rolling over in their graves if they saw this kind of thing happening. Also, the people of our country are insisting on citizenship and no mail-in ballots, with exceptions for military, disabilities, illness, or travel. Thank you for your attention to this. Thank you for your attention to this matter, Trump wrote. In lots of places, you do already need to qualify for one of these to get a mail-in ballot. I'm pretty sure, like in Texas, for instance, and like Florida and a lot of other places. I don't know about Florida, actually. But I know in Texas, to get the mail-in ballot, you need to like prove one of these, right? You can't just request it for no reason. You have to give some sort of a reason and prove it. I know there are some states that like provide mail-in ballots to everybody as like an effort to like try and just up voter activity in general, right? To try and make it as easy as possible for people to come out and vote. And like, if you're truly pro-democracy, right, and you truly want that voting rate of the populace to be higher and higher, to be as high as it possibly can be, then you would be in favor of like no questions asked, no hurdles to jump through mail-in ballots, that you could say like, hey, I just want to do a mail-in ballot. I don't want to have to wait in line at the facility on November 8th or whenever early voting would be, right? Or I'll drive 20 miles plus to wherever the nearest polling station is. I just want to do a mail-in ballot. You'd think if you were truly pro-democracy, you'd want to do that kind of thing, right? And to say that the people of our country are insisting on citizenship, everybody who you can only vote if you're a citizen. I don't know where this comes from. Like, it is illegal to vote if you're not a citizen. Like, I don't really see any mechanism by which somebody could vote if they're not a citizen. Like, you have to show an ID and all that kind of stuff. So, and people are definitely not insisting on no mail-in ballots. Like, I'm sure you could get people to agree, like, yeah, non-citizens should not vote, even though that's not happening. But I'm sure, but like I have a very hard time imagining the majority of people would agree that no mail-in ballots is a good idea and that they're pro that. Trump has also pushed Republicans to back the Save America Act, which would require proof of citizenship to register to vote and voter ID to cast ballots, which the House passed but which faces hurdles in the Senate. Sources told ABC News that pro-Trump activists have been urging the president and the White House staff for months to use an executive order to take action ahead of the midterms by declaring a national emergency. Yeah, the national emergency thing, like I keep talking about, right? The just reeks of the Weimar Republic Article 48 emergency order, to power grab that they used to change the way voting worked, to exclude whole swaths of people from the voting process. A White House official told ABC News that staff is regularly in communication with a variety of outside advocates who want to share their policy ideas with the president. Any speculation about policies the president may or may not announce is just that, speculation. Speculation about the draft order picked up steam when former White House advisor Steve Bannon discussed the idea on his War Room show last week. Yeah, but like what they said earlier in this article, we know that they've been discussing it. So like to say that he may or may not announce it, right, is literally truthful. Like it's not just speculation. We know that they're considering this, right? It's a leaked executive order as far as I understand. In a statement to ABC News, Bannon took credit for his show championing ongoing investigations into the big steal of the 2020 election. I just can't help but think about like Mike Lindell doing his whole $5 million to prove the election wasn't stolen thing. Them getting a bunch of third-party arbiters to handle this. They literally ruled against him on this. The guy came out and proved using the statistics that they wanted him to use that the election was not stolen, in fact. And no court cases have corroborated this. If you look into the specific election fraud claims that people make, all of them seem to hold no water. So many of them are so easily disprovable. Like the whole ballot stuffing thing where you see like there's like a famous video of them moving boxes under the, they're taking boxes of ballots from under the table and putting it on top. That must mean that they're using these ballots, right? Well, when you look into it, it's really part of like a longer video where you can see that like they had moved the ballots under those boxes of ballots under there because they needed to make room, and that it was just a clip that they showed of them moving the boxes. So many of them are so easily disprovable. Referring to the Chinese Communist Party, Bannon claimed there is no doubt the CCP took an active role in removing President Trump from office, despite there being no evidence to support the allegation. See, like that that intuitively doesn't make sense to me because like I'm sure the Communist Party, the CCP of China, in the sense that there are adversaries, right? If you're going to take that perspective, then and that they want to interfere negatively in our elections, that they would like want Trump to be elected because he is a disaster for the United States, right? Like you'd think that like, and he's clearly a destabilizing force and hurts our allies and partnerships and all that kind of stuff, right? I don't think there's any argument about that. And so like, you'd think that they would be pro getting Trump elected, not pro getting Biden elected, right? The only reason they would want to get Biden elected is if like they were like altruistic actors who like, they want to see the best for the United States, which like I have a feeling is not the case. So just very strange. I mean, I'm sure these people Bannon would disagree with that, but I have a hard time imagining a good case being made for that. News of the draft order received widespread backlash from Democrats, including House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries and Committee on House Administration Ranking Member Joe Morell, who said, quote, Donald Trump has repeatedly said he wants to nationalize our elections because he intends to steal them. We reject the legality of any executive order based on debunked claims of Chinese interference in the 2020 election. Jeffries and Morell said in a statement, Democrats will not allow Donald Trump to take over this election, and neither will the American people. I don't know, man. Like he's done so much junk now, so much nonsense so far. I don't know what would stop him if he came out and said like, yeah, we're just going to withhold federal funding if you guys don't adopt these rules. Like, ha ha ha. Like, we get what we want sort of thing. Representative Ted Lieu posted on X, there's no national emergency exception in Article 1, Section 4 of the Constitution. Yeah, like there was with the Article 48 of the Weimar Republic. States regulate elections unless Congress passes law. That's why Trump desperately wants to pass the SAVE Act to suppress voting. Courts will slap Trump down just like they did with his illegal tariffs, Lieu wrote. So yeah, this is a few months old. As far as I understand, this executive order obviously hasn't been passed. I'm sure I would have heard about it because it would be a really big deal. We'll see. If it closer to the midterms, I would imagine if they're going to make a power grab like this, they'd want it to be like closer to the midterms, so that they could get as much, give people as little time as possible to get the voter IDs, to do whatever they need to do so that it could benefit the Republican interests as much as possible. So we'll see as we get a bit closer to the midterms if this actually turns out, or this was a few months ago. I haven't heard anything about it since. So I wonder if maybe like their lawyers came to the conclusion like, hey, this is actually a little bit too ridiculous. I don't know if we're going to be able to make this work, or if there's any easy way for us to do this. So I don't know. But it's yeah, like even his own lawyer, his own supporter of this acknowledged like, the administering, the control, and the way that the federal election is run is clearly in the hands of the states themselves. And so there's no way that he could just unilaterally through executive order make this the rule of law, right? They'd have to do some screwery. They'd have to like do something cynical, like saying we're going to withhold federal funding unless you adopt this kind of thing or whatever. Um, and just yeah, I'm Mike Lindell, of course. Yeah, bro. There's no way people think he has any legitimacy anymore. Like, come on, he lost his own $5 million competition thing that I'm sure he put out there as like as like a like ridiculous. This is a bunch of clowns.